Well, hello everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today, we are going to be talking about J.K. Rowling, that big transphobe J.K. Rowling, and whether or not that title is at all accurate, which it isn't. Spoiler alert, it's not. And why is it that people seem so quick to label other people? Now there's a lot to unpack with this story, which is weird because it's based on Twitter nonsense and one essay. J.K. Rowling, for those of you who, I was going to say don't know, but if you don't know who J.K. Rowling is, I don't know what your problem is. The author of the Harry Potter series, one of the highest selling authors in the history of the world, and for those of you who have not read the Harry Potter books, one of the best authors ever, in my opinion. She's amazing. Really a fantastic writer. A year ago, J.K. Rowling got in trouble. Now, before we get into why that is, it is important to know this. J.K. Rowling is very far on the left in terms of her political belief. She is a self-described socialist. She has nothing but very left-wing views. I don't know if this is true, but I think this is accurate. I'm not sure if the whole thing is true. She is, I believe, the only person to ever lose her billionaire status because she donates so much money to charity. Fact check me on that. I've heard that before, but I've never actually fact checked that. But I could definitely believe it. She runs a couple different foundations that I'm aware of. She does a lot of charity work. She is an all-around good person. That is kind of what it comes down to. I'm going to adjust this just a little bit. Okay, there we go. So anyway, about a year ago, J.K. Rowling got into some trouble on Twitter because she had posted some musings about the state of our trans people here in the world, and specifically in the UK and in the US, in the industrialized world. She was worrying about some of the things that she saw going on in the trans movement. And it got her into some trouble. People didn't like it on the left, very progressive people didn't like some of the things she was saying. And so she basically shut up about it for about a year. Now, in the course of the last year, she has been doing a lot of research on trans issues and educating herself and trying to find a way to become more well-read on the subjects. And J.K. Rowling is obviously a person who reads everything. She's a very well-read individual. But she's really used this past year to educate herself on this issue a lot. Now, this week, she put up a tweet that there was an article written about quote-unquote people who menstruate, and it refused to use the term woman in the article because it was talking about people who menstruate. And J.K. Rowling put up this tweet that said, quote, "I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out here. Wumbin, Wimpond, Woomood," end quote. So that tweet got her in a whole bunch of trouble this week because people were saying that she's obviously a transphobe because women don't need to menstruate anymore. Women are, menstruating doesn't make you a woman, which is true. There are women who don't menstruate. However, everyone who menstruates is a woman. So we kind of have that to fall back on here. And people started calling her a TERF. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, which you probably should be because it's a stupid term. There's a brand of feminism that people have deemed anti-trans feminists. These are people who think that women are special and women should deserve a special status. That might be a bad way to put it. They definitely believe that women are women and that men who become women aren't necessarily women. Now, wherever you fall on that argument is up for debate, but those feminists have had a falling out with the ultra-progressive wing of the left. And so they're called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. So J.K. Rowling, according to a lot of people on the left this week, is a TERF. Now, She released a 3,000-word essay on her website about this issue this week. And I'm going to read some excerpts from it here so you can see how terrible she is. Not really. That is, for those of you who can't tell, that's a little sarcasm. It is a fantastic essay. It really is. She talks about having compassion and love for trans people, that they need protecting. She also talks about being skeptical about giving up space for women only, and not necessarily loving the idea that any man who now identifies as a woman gets to belong to this special class that she belongs to. She uses some data in there that I've always found troubling, that we're going to get into just a little bit. And before we do any of that, real quick, let me just, I don't think I've ever talked about the trans issue on the podcast. So here are my thoughts in a nutshell. I do not care. Most people do not care what you want to do with your body. If you are a man and you feel like a woman and you want to transition, I hope that helps. If you are a woman, you want to be a man, I really hope that helps. I have two areas where this bothers me. It bothers me in sports, and it bothers me in children. I think it should be illegal for children to transition. I think that it is child abuse to allow a person without a fully formed prefrontal cortex to make decisions that could change their life forever. And I don't like it in sports, because men who transition to women have a clear advantage in sports. And if you think that that's not true, you are not basing that on science, you're basing that on compassion. So there are things we all sacrifice in life, and it's unfortunate, but we do. If you want to transition to a female role, you do not get to play professional sports. You don't get to compete in sports against women. You just don't. And you've seen an explosion of trans athletes dominating female sports, and I find that very troubling. And the Olympic Committee just said that trans athletes can compete. It's terrible. Imagine you're a woman, a naturally born woman, and you train your entire life for an event. You are the best in the world. And a man who was a man for 30 years transitions, and then she beats you in the event that you trained your entire life for. Because there is a biological component to sports. It's not fair. It's not fair to women. And this is the kind of stuff J.K. Rowling's concerned about. She is concerned that men are going to push women out of female spaces. Now again, on a personal note, on a personal thing, I don't care what people do. I have friends who are trans. It does not, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I will call you whatever you want to be called. Not true. I will call you, a man or a woman. I'm not going to use a made-up pronoun because I just think that that's silly. But I will, it doesn't matter to me what you want to be called or how you want to act in your life. I don't care. Those are the only areas that I care. And only because I have definite qualms about it. And that's the kind of stuff J.K. Rowling talks about in this essay. We're going to read some excerpts from this so you can see. This is I encourage everyone to go read it. It's 3,000 words. It's a little long. Take you 10, 15 minutes to read. But what she does in there is go out of her way to say, we need to treat trans people with compassion. I am worried about female spaces. That seems like a totally reasonable spot to start with. So here are some of the things that, she lists 4 components. I want to read 2 of them real quick. Some of the issues she has. So here's some quotes from the essay that she wrote. So this is the first quote. Quote, firstly, these are the 4 reasons again. Quote, firstly, I have a charitable trust that focuses on alleviating social deprivation in Scotland with a particular emphasis on women and children. Among other things, my trust supports projects for female prisoners and for survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. I also fund medical research into MS, a disease that behaves very differently in men and women. It's been clear to me for a while that the new trans activism is having, or is likely having, a significant impact on many of the causes I support, because it's pushing to erode the legal definitions of sex and replace it with gender. End quote. The third reason she lists was freedom of speech. as to why she thought it was necessary to write this essay and talk about this issue. And then this is the other quote for the fourth reason. Quote, "The fourth is where things start to get truly personal. I'm concerned about the huge explosion of young women wishing to transition and also about the increasing number who seem to be detransitioning because they regret taking steps that have, in some cases, altered their body irrevocably and taken away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted and that transitioning was partly due to homophobia either in society or in their families." End quote. My main problem with where we are in the trans debate today is that the people on the left want to pretend that the science on this is settled, and it is far from settled. The idea that a trans person, someone battling gender dysmorphia, the idea that that person transitioning is the life changer that they need. We don't know that. And that's my only problem. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying we don't know that that is actually the thing that makes people better. And we know this because the trans suicide rate is around 40%. And that number does not improve after transition surgery. About 40% of trans people will attempt suicide at some point in their lives. That is so much higher than the general public, and you cannot attribute that gap to things like bullying. There's absolutely no way to make up for that gap. There is some sort of mental imbalance in a lot of people who are trans. And this is not to say that it's all some sort of mistake or that it's all bad in their mind. That's not true. But what it is to say is that we can't just pretend that we know how best to help people who are trans. Now, if it turns out that the best thing we can do is transition and accept them into society, then great. We should absolutely do that. And I think we're doing a good job of that right now. I think that the trans acceptance is probably at an all-time high right today. My only problem is that we can't pretend that we know for a fact that that is the best thing that they can do. What if tomorrow we isolated something in the brain of someone battling gender dysmorphia with, what if we came up with a pill, one-time dose that fixed that feeling, and they realized, oh, I'm not a woman in a man's body, what I am is a gay man. Okay. Is that worse or better? If it gets rid of these feeling of angst and that uncomfortableness in one's own skin, and we could figure out a way to do that. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case, but what I don't like is pretending that we know the answers, because we don't, and that is really bothersome. And it does bother me. It bothers me because it's coming from a place of compassion, but it's a misplaced sense of compassion. It's this idea that we know the answers, and if you guys were just not mean to trans people, there'd be no problem. So she goes on to talk about some of the other things that I've talked about in the past, which is that there is a gigantic explosion in the amount of trans people that are happening at a young age. And the idea that there's not a social component to this is absurd. So she lists a couple statistics in here. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transition treatment. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their number. So if you're autistic, you have trouble engaging in the world, it might now seem that you have other issues that are now more prevalent. She talked about, in her essay here, Rowling talks about the fact that when she was young, she was very uncomfortable in her body. And she had a really hard time with a lot of different issues. This essay gets very personal at points. But part of the thing that she was uncomfortable about, she said, if there had been this explosion in sort of pushing people to transition in the 80s, she may have done it because she felt uncomfortable as a female. And you're looking at a lot of kids here today who are transitioning But what they're describing too, and there's been some interesting things about this, is that let's see if she listed it in here. Da, 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 da. Oh, no, they didn't. Okay. There's basically a lot of parents, and there has been a little bit of research into this, not a lot, have shown that, for example, when one child in a kid's friend group, and this is in middle school and high school, when one child in a friend group transitions, you'll see little pockets of people in that friend group who all decide to transition around the same time. They call it this rapid onset gender dysmorphia. It happens in clusters because to think that there is not a societal impact of people transitioning is not true. In young people who have no idea what's going on in their brain to begin with, are making life-changing decisions at such a young age. The overwhelming majority of people, by the way, who experience some sort of gender dysmorphia, 60 to 90% of them grow out of it by the time they're an adult. 90% of people when they're young who have that feeling grow out of it, and what happens is they wind up being gay, and that's fine. I mean, that's just what it happens. You know, if you're a gay man and you are growing up, you know, sometimes you might feel like a woman. Not all the time, obviously, but it wouldn't be unheard of for that to be the case because you're finding yourself same-sex attracted and you fall into what are considered traditionally feminine roles in your brain. And there's nothing wrong with that, but to then say, aha, well, you feel like a woman today, therefore let's make you a woman today. Well, no, that's a bad thing. That's actually a bad thing. If most people grow out of it and then gravitate towards homosexuality, well, what we're doing is just erasing gay people at that point. And that there's something that almost seems anti-gay about how quick we are to want to transition people away from same-sex attraction. So anyway, this is the line in the essay I wanted to read because I think it demonstrates that J.K. Rowling is going out of her way to say that trans people are people, they need compassion and help. And so I like this one. So, quote, I believe the majority of trans-identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable to all the reasons I've outlined. Trans people need and deserve protection. Like women, they're most likely to be killed by sexual partners. Trans women who work in the industry, particularly trans women of color, are at particular risk. Like every other domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor I know, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men. End quote. Does that sound like someone who hates trans people? Does that sound like someone who's not compassionate about some of the struggles faced by the trans community? Of course not. Because of course she isn't. J.K. Rowling wants everyone to be fine. But this idea that if you voice any opinion outside of the far left, you're going to be cast out of the group. And that's what they're doing. They are taking people who will support them on 99% of the causes, finding the one spot that they disagree with them, and then casting her as a bigot. The cowardice, first of all, by the people in the Harry Potter movies. Everyone has come out against J.K. Rowling. What are their names? Daniel Radcliffe, that Rupert, whatever his face is, Emma Watson. Like all the main stars from the Harry Potter movies have come out and condemned J.K. Rowling as if they don't owe their entire lives to that woman. It's just insane. It's insane. The moral preening by people who probably didn't even read this essay. It's 3,000 words. They didn't take the 15 minutes to read it because if they did, all they're saying is, I can't believe someone would say such hateful, mean-spirited things. Read the essay, people. Everyone, read the essay. This is what, if this is mean, if this is hateful, then we are in trouble. Because you can never have an opinion. You can never talk about a serious issue. Because the second you offend someone like J.K. Rowling, you're out. You're done. It's over for you. And it bothers me. Here's some of the things that I read in a couple different articles that really bothered me. So here's some quotes. Quote, white women have always tried to control the definitions of women, and there is a legacy of black feminism and women of color who have fought against the singularity. White feminism White feminism has a long lineage of scientific racism and biological essentialism, and that is just another extension of that, end quote. So, J.K. Rowling, this is just another in the long line of scientific racism and biological essentialism, according to some people. Another one, she is arguing against 1% of the population who she recognizes as being harmed and marginalized. This is not a position protecting your own rights as a woman. That is becoming the oppressor. So J.K. Rowling, scientifically racist and an oppressor of trans people. She clearly wants to keep them down, obviously. It's just all ridiculous, people. But we're gonna accuse others of wrongthink. We're going to say you are out of line with society in this one area and cast you out. You're outside the Overton window because the Overton window is shrinking. It's this big right now. You can only talk about this. And if you're outside the Overton window, then you're in trouble. And J.K. Rowling, congratulations. Today, the far left progressives shut the Overton window and threw you out of the house. It bothers me substantially because this woman obviously cares a lot about trans people. She obviously cares a lot about trans people. She cares a lot about women and girls. She does so much with her own time and money to protect women and girls, and is saying that trans people need that too, but we need to be careful about allowing people into spaces for women only. Now, agree or disagree. If you want to have a talk about where she's wrong, where she isn't, that's fine. But to jump to the label of transphobe, of TERF, of a bigot, the oppressor, it's insane. It is an insane thing that people are doing. There's a lot on this issue. We might do another episode on this pretty soon because there is a lot to unpack with the trans issue in general. It's such a small percentage of the population. I don't know why it's such a giant issue. The overwhelming majority of people don't care. They don't care what trans people want to do. They care about being forced to do things they don't want to do. That's the only time I come down on it. And they care about things like sports because I'm not going to pretend that everyone's equal. If you're a man and you transition to a woman, you don't get to play sports, in my opinion. You don't. I think it's unfair. And I can do a whole thing on that. I know quite a lot about that. There are certain things that do not change regardless of your hormone therapy. You don't get to take a bunch of testosterone through puberty and through young adulthood and then have the effects of that go away. Men have a narrower angle of the hip than women. Never changes. Not going to ever change. The narrow angle of the hip allows you to provide more force with your legs. Why can men run faster and jump higher? Because of that biological advantage. They have higher bone density, which allows more ligaments to attach to the bone, which connects to more muscle, which is why they have higher muscle mass. There are so many things. Higher bone density doesn't go away, by the way, with hormone replacement therapy. It doesn't change. And there's 1,000 things like this that we could go through. But does that mean I don't like trans people? Absolutely not. Of course not. That would be ridiculous. So anyway, we might do a whole nother episode on this. My point of this entire episode was just that we have to be careful about this brand of progressivism that is so quick to label, so quick to judge, and so quick to say you don't deserve a voice for your opinions because your opinions are wrong. J.K. Rowling might be wrong about some of the things she says in her essay. She might be. But none of it, absolutely none of it, comes from a place of hate or bigotry. And to try and pretend that it does, it's just a lie. It really is. So anyway, we're going to leave it there today. J.K. Rowling, not a transphobe, not a TERF, cares about trans people, cares about everyone, it seems like. Really wants everyone to do well in life. Important to remember, that's the summary of this entire thing. And also, radicals are bad. There we go. We're going to leave it there. I am Tyler Chrestman, and I will talk to you guys later.